So if I think about why I don't always perceive myself, or I don't generally perceive myself to be to be good at keeping secrets, it's because I get overwhelmed by all that information and I don't actually know what to do with it. Like
Mm.
I can feel it as a like almost a physical or a somatic burden. And I just have to tell somebody. I have to find somebody to tell because otherwise I'm going to explode.
Yeah.
Like that's the felt sense of stress.
Okay.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, you know, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hello, Malinda.
Hi, Mariah.
Welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
So this is Malinda Berry, and she and I met at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary when I was a student. She is a professor there, and she was also my advisor. So that's how I got to know Malinda. Many talks in her office full of books, which I love. And so when I asked her what her bad topic would be, she picked talking about secrets or keeping secrets, or not wanting to keep secrets. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. I want to start off giving a sort of content warning. We'll be talking about secrets and power dynamics, particularly surrounding John Howard Yoder and the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary. So we will be talking about sexual misconduct. And so take care of yourself in regards to these topics.
Yeah, we don't get graphic, but we do definitely talk about the dynamics at play and why there were such toxic secrets kept for so long.
Right.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that it's a very complicated situation, and we can go into all the different facets of what happened, but particularly the role of secrets and confidentiality and how that played in this particular situation.
Mm-hmm.
So do what with that information what you will.
Yeah. And take care of yourselves, as Mariah said.
So how would you define secrets? And how would you distinguish secrets from confidentiality or keeping things private, that sort of thing?
Oh, I love this question because it kind of gets to the heart of the issue here, like, or why when you asked me for my topic, I was like, secret. So, and maybe I'll also kind of define this by telling just a brief story. So when I was in college, I was at my parents' house one day and my mother said, hey, somebody put this Gospel Herald in our mailbox at church and there's a note on here to give it to you. And the lead story was about like calling young people to be pastors. Mm-hmm. And so like the note that was scrawled on it was essentially, and it was anonymous. It was from somebody at church who wanted me to think about becoming a pastor. And so I looked at it and I was like, well, I can't be a pastor. I'm not any good at keeping secrets. So it was, what was really interesting to me was like that's one of the things I associate with being a pastor. And what I meant by that, like keeping secrets, was like keeping things confidential, private, or like understanding or thinking really carefully through what kind of information certain people should or should not have access to, right? Like being seen as being trustworthy with that information, and just maybe even have a lot of capacity to keep things to themselves. Mm-hmm. And so as I've thought about this over the years, like there are secrets, there's confidentiality, there's privacy. Sure. So a secret is probably the most tightly held piece of information. If something is secret, that's a piece of information that a limited number of people have access to. We sometimes talk about things being like an open secret. There's information lots of people know, but the people who know are supposed to act as if they don't.
Right.
Like we don't talk about it. When it comes to confidentiality, I think one of the kind of generic agreements often is that what's said in the group is going to stay in the group, that there's, that you can expect confidentiality here. Other people describe confidentiality as I am placing confidence in you or whoever has access to this information that you will use this information well. But then there are lots of people, I think kind of the conventional definition of confidentiality is you do not say a word. You pretend as if you do not know.
Mm-hmm.
But that falls over into secret keeping, I think.
Right.
And can start becoming kind of power plays or can lead to information being used in a way that's power over
Mm-hmm.
other people. And then you also asked about like privacy, like, this difference between keeping things confidential, keeping things private. And so I would say, yeah, again, in terms of what I've learned around professional processes, like right now, I'm on a search committee at the seminary. And this is a highly confidential process, we would say. Well, one of the ways that I interpret what confidentiality means for this process is it's my ethical obligation to keep most of the information I have access to private. And there's some really good reasons for that. Like keeping that information private is one way to show respect and consideration to the people who have applied for the job.
Mm.
Because people apply for jobs for all kinds of reasons. So there it's, I mean, if I start feeling the urge to like start talking about who's applied or not, which I, the way I characterize that, like that's a
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that impulse to share that information is going to compromise the integrity of the process and
Mm-hmm.
can actually do harm to the people who are in the process. And keeping that information private allows them, it helps meet their need for like safety and security. Now, okay, so for me, that's very different than if I was told, now you have to keep this a secret.
Right.
If I was told I needed to keep something a secret, okay, again, you can tell kind of by my body language here and my tone of voice, like that starts to stink.
Mm. Yeah.
Again, I mean, I think, because if we went to the dictionary, like a lot of these words would kind of be synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as I've thought about this, beginning with that kind of basic story of like, oh, pastors have to keep, like they have to keep secrets. Like there's that some professions have, like there are moments where there are these moral obligations to safeguard the information that's been entrusted to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where I would kind of get at like my own personality. I sometimes find being trusted with that amount of information overwhelming.
Yeah.
So if I think about why I don't always perceive myself, or I don't generally perceive myself to be good at keeping secrets, it's because I get overwhelmed by all that information and I don't actually know what to do with it. Like I can feel it as a like almost a physical or a somatic burden. And I just have to tell somebody. I have to find somebody to tell because otherwise I'm going to explode.
Yeah.
Like that's the felt sense of stress.
Yeah, I can identify with a lot of that. I've noticed that if something happens in my life, like my urge is to immediately talk about it, to immediately tell someone. I can't keep it inside of me. I have to tell someone. And that's hard being a pastor. And I realized, I think what's important is it known? Like, is it articulated? When something is confidential, does that mean I can tell my spiritual director?
Mm-hmm.
Who is so far removed from the situation, which would be far healthier than going to someone within the congregation and talking about it. Does confidentiality include Nick, my spouse? And most of the time it does not. But again, there's sometimes when I'm like ready to go to bed and I just feel like bursting. Like I just want to tell Nick, because he's my person, to tell him everything. I just want to tell him. And paying attention to that kind of bodily response is really important. Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and a soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast. So I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch. Now I'll let you get back to this episode of Called to Be Bad. Do you have any other stories associated with your love of secrets?
So maybe the other thing I would say, and because I've also tried to figure out, okay, like this impression that I'll call it a kind of childlike impression that I had that pastors are supposed to keep secrets. I've also tried to figure out, okay, well, where, scratching my head, like, where is that from? And I think some of it is rooted in this instruction that we get as children, whether it's in school or whether it's in a Sunday school kind of setting. There is also in our culture an injunction that if there's something going on in your life that you need to talk to a grown-up about, here's a list of the kinds of grown-ups who you should be able to go to in your life. A teacher, a coach, a pastor or a religious leader, or like, if not your parents, right? There is this cultural expectation that religious leaders are people who around whom our culture says these are trustworthy people. Now, one of the other things that we've come to learn over time, as the church has grappled more openly with sexual abuse and sexualized violence, we need to qualify or better qualify or better describe this class of grown-ups who we want children to feel empowered, or vulnerable people we want to feel empowered to go speak to when they have something of a highly private and personal nature that they need help and support to process, right? Because plenty of pastors have either been abusers or they have been part of secrecy and cover up,
right?
Like keeping things obscured. And so I would say that's another part of my personality. Well, I value transparency really highly. And transparency like is the opposite in some ways of secrets. Or transparency and confidentiality often have a difficult time being integrated, getting along with each other. Some people would say that transparency and confidentiality are like oil and water. They just don't mix. So yeah, I like, again, the more I sort of think about this and reflect on it, I've come to realize that like my beef, sure, it has something to do with my personality, but it also has something to do with wanting a more nuanced organizational culture in the groups that I'm a part of.
Right. Yeah, and for so long, at least in my mind, the narrative around confidentiality has been one of protection. But as kind of what you're bringing up is, who is it protecting? Is it protecting people in power, or is it protecting more vulnerable people? I'm thinking of a very specific example, and I don't know if we want to go there or not.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about John Howard Yoder at the seminary. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because a lot of the narrative was, let's keep this private and confidential. And then that came at a severe cost. Do we want to go there? Do we want to talk about that at all?
Well, I think we could. That's been on my mind too.
Yeah. And so maybe we'll give a little bit of background.
Yeah. So John Howard Yoder was a powerful teacher and figure among Mennonites in the second half of the 20th century. He worked at what had been Mennonite Board of Missions, one of the predecessor organizations to Mennonite Mission Network. And then he held teaching posts at places like Goshen College, Goshen Biblical Seminary, which was one of the predecessor organizations or seminaries to Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary. He was an itinerant teacher too. Like, people would call him up and ask him to come teach here or be the featured speaker at this conference. And so he really had a global reach and had spent time in Europe doing his graduate studies. Well, like, there are lots of things that were going on with Yoder. I mean, some people have suspected that he was on the autism spectrum. There was as part of the sexual misconduct process, he agreed to an examination by a psychologist, but those reports have all been destroyed as far as I understand it. And Yoder did not allow whatever that report said to be entered into the more public process that Indiana Michigan Conference initiated. But so this goes back to the open secret thing too. Okay, so Yoder had a bit of a bugaboo and a preoccupation with sex, would be one of the ways I would describe it. And then so now you're getting Malinda's opinion here. And I think that this bugaboo rose to diagnosable clinical levels. Okay. And at the same time, like, his intellect, because he was super gifted. Like, I heard these stories about how he would sit in teaching faculty meetings and be grading papers and participating in the discussion simultaneously. Or when he was a seminary student, he taught himself biblical Greek in 2 weeks. Just this incredible, prodigious skill. But that he was also pretty gruff. The other thing I think to keep in mind is that Yoder was coming of age at the same time is in young adulthood at the same time that Alfred Kinsey, the sexologist at Indiana University, is undertaking these studies of human sexuality and publishing these findings around sexuality. So there are taboos and secrets being broken around sex and sexuality more broadly in the culture. And again, kind of Malinda's opinion about all this is that sort of stuck a little bit for Yoder. And because he was preoccupied with the church as a kind of sociological unit, he was wanting to figure out, wanting to run what he called an experiment in Christian ethics around sexual norms. He was curious about how single people have their sexual needs met. And what he argued was that if you are a member of the church, we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. So we can have sexually intimate interactions and relationships with each other inside the church as a way of helping people meet their need for sexual expression. Well, so we can imagine all of the ways that this was gonna go wrong. And it did. And I think the ways that it went wrong were from how he even structured it wasn't actually an experiment. There was no advisory board. There was no code of ethics. There was no waiver that people signed agreeing to participate in this experiment. No. It was all shady as hell. Okay. Let's just be clear about that. And so he abused his power. And he manipulated people. And even when people created boundaries with him, he acted as if that was inappropriate. He was confronted by people, spouses of women who he preyed upon. He classmates of women who were single. Professors knew, his boss knew, the president. But guess what? The president was 35 years old, and the president had been one of Yoder's students. So this is a perfect storm. And it's in a context where people's opinions and attitudes towards sex and sexuality and their understanding of the human sex drive put the onus on women to not be seductive. All of the negative stereotypes that we have and attitudes that we have around women as temptresses and sirens and blah, and Eve and blah, 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 blah. All that stuff is completely operative So that there was also a kind of rendering like an invisibility that women had, even though women were the primary agents of justice here. And so that's I think also kind of an important part of this Yoder legacy thing that we talk about, and that is the way, like, this all refused to go away, because that would be the other thing I would say about all the secrecy stuff, is that it is the nature of truth to be told,
Mm.
right? And so this Yoder stuff was kind of it was sort of an open secret, like, you got to watch out for Yoder. This was the thing, this was the conventional wisdom that
Mm.
spreads around when you have a predator on the loose. And if somebody isn't clued in, right? Like, if somebody isn't clued into the open secret, they are more at risk.
Right.
But like, this stuff just kind of swirled around and around, and I would describe it as a haunting, right? Like, it sort of haunted AMBS, it haunted Mennonites. It, in addition to the actual real extraordinary moral harm
Mm.
that it inflicted upon the women who Yoder preyed on and assaulted,
Mm.
and probably even raped. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I will say that.
Mm.
And so then another kind of question becomes how, because of the anonymity, that, so maybe another layer of of confidentiality and pride, like wanting to respect those women's right to remain private and anonymous. It's really difficult to know just how many women were victimized by Yoder's behavior. So I think one of the reasons why so much attention gets spotlighted on him is because we also want there to be room for women to choose to come forward and be known, because there's stigma related to being a victim survivor.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I want to also recognize that one of the reasons why it's important to think about privacy, and this goes back to, what are these guidelines we put in place, what are they strategies for?
Mm-hmm.
um if I can't know someone's name, because that is a way for them to experience a modicum of peace, then I can live with not knowing their name, right? Like, my need for fairness and justice needs
Oh,
to
I
be
see. Like if it
tempered.
was a survivor coming forward who wanted
Right.
to remain anonymous. I see.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah,
And so this is where confidentiality and transparency actually do work together,
sure.
can work hand in glove. Again, when we're clear about what the purpose of the information is.
Right.
What I also noticed too around the legacy and the kind of the haunting of John Howard Yoder, is that there were people who thought they had all the information.
Mm.
And so whenever this stuff would come up in public settings at conferences, and people would be like, hey, we need to tell the truth about what Yoder did. Well, we've heard the truth. He's been disciplined. Like, sit down. What's wrong with you? Like, let's get over this. Well, I was talking with somebody once who had been in that camp.
Mm.
And then when Rachel Waltner Goossen's article appeared in Mennonite Quarterly Review in January, what was that, 2015? Oh, the chastening, Mariah.
Mm.
And there's a deep desire to not be that wrong again,
Mm.
for people who sort of poo-pooed that and said, well, we know what there is to know about Yoder. This is a few people who misunderstood what he was trying to do, and he was socially awkward, but, like, let's get over this. When they learn the truth, they're like, oops.
Yeah, you can't really put a time limit on this sort of like truth telling or healing work that needs to be done. I remember hearing about severe pushback if anyone wanted to kind of bring it up again, that they'd be like, no, you're opening a can of worms, almost in a threatening way, rather than like, yes, let's keep truth telling so that we can heal rather than just move forward. Heal so that something like this is prevented from happening again.
Or at least we're better prepared.
Right. Yeah.
that we're better prepared and more willing to believe people.
Right. And so you can create an environment so that students feel comfortable coming forward and have safe authority figures that they could come forward to tell to. I remember when going to seminary, someone asking me, if you needed to tell someone something important, make sure you have a couple people you can go to. And I thought that stuck with me because I liked that feeling of safety. Like, okay, if I needed to go tell someone, I could go to Malinda, I could go to whoever and tell them and feel secure. And that kind of institutional safety net, I think, is something that's helpful to make explicit.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I like about that guideline is it should be more than one person.
Mm,
I also want to actually go back to something that you had said, Mariah, and kind of highlight it. Like the narrative around confidentiality is a phrase that you used, and I really like that because I think the other thing that has happened is that for people like you and me, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and paint us with the same brush here for a moment, who value, I think, transparency and integrity in particular ways, like our need for those things for like a high level of communication. The narrative around that was we're busybodies who like to gossip, right? I mean, because that was the self-talk, that was a rah, 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 rah. Like, oh, Malinda, you just want to gossip and you just like finding out who knows and you just like being in the know. And so there I think for some of us there is this sort of either this self-talk or this kind of demonization of a desire for a freer flow of information. So I also practice this form of circle process called the circle way. And one of the things that my teachers there said is that when things come forward in the group or in a circle, it's coming forward for healing.
mm,
So that when we create conditions where things can start to come forward, we are becoming agents of healing.
mm.
And this gets exactly to what you were saying about Yoder, like the conflict avoidant. We don't want to harm people. We don't want to embarrass people. We don't want to shame people. All of these things that we don't want to do are indeed it's virtuous to not shame people. But at what cost? Is precisely the question you asked. We're practicing the virtue of intellectual rigor, let's say. We're trying to convince Yoder of the core logic in his thinking. And that's going to help him see the light and put him on a path of redemption. Well, the problem was that approach to practicing the virtue of intellectual rigor is minimizing real harm.
Right.
And real violence. And it's also putting trust. It's inviting a community to put trust in a few people who are having these intimate, secret, highly confidential meetings and conversations that maybe there are notes and records of, but it's not like they're being posted on the Wittenberg door or published in the alumni newsletter.
Right.
I think this John Howard Yoder example goes to some of the heart of the reasons why I think we would do well as Christians to develop other norms and practices around things like confidentiality, privacy, secrecy. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe at the bottom of it all, or kind of how it all weaves together for me, at least in this moment, is we all just want to know that we've got a place and that we matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Would it be okay if I end with a blessing for you and all the viewers and listeners?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. May you go from this place knowing that it is okay to have big feelings regarding information, that it is important to notice and maybe even verbalize your intentions around a conversation. And may you be blessed with people that you may go to feel safe and secure, knowing that you are held and loved in their embrace. Amen.
Amen.
That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.